Charles Walker was a man who was proud of his origins. Resident of an upscale neighborhood in Boston, he maintained a comfortable life and was used to an environment where the past and traditions were respected. At least, that was how he saw things. Immaculate-looking, with well-combed gray hair and always dressed in classic suits, Charles felt that the neighborhood where he lived should remain free of disruptive changes. And for him, anyone who didn't fit his vision of decency represented a problem. Across town, Dr. Elijah Thompson was a renowned cardiologist. African-American, young and admired for his competence, he had recently moved to the same neighborhood as Charles, a choice motivated by the search for a safe place for his wife and children. With a reserved personality and always polite, Elijah was the type to avoid problems. He believed that, by acting respectfully, he could deconstruct prejudices that still existed in certain people. However, he knew that, for some, his presence was a source of discomfort. Charles, from the moment he saw Elijah and his family moving into the neighborhood, felt a growing uneasiness. When she saw him arriving home one afternoon, she decided to act in a way she deemed necessary. Without thinking twice, Charles picked up the phone and called the police. "There is someone strange hanging around my neighborhood. It's dangerous, maybe armed," he lied coldly on the call. The patrol didn't take long to arrive, surprising Elijah, who, at that moment, was unloading boxes for his move. The police approach was direct, although the officers soon realized that there was no threat. Charles observed the scene from afar, certain that he was doing what was right to maintain order. However, an unexpected turn of events changed everything at that very moment. During the police approach, Charles began to feel intense pain in his chest. The pressure was increasing, and he felt as if the air was being sucked from his lungs. He tried to ask for help, but his voice barely came out. The doctor he had tried to push away was now his only hope. As the officers questioned Elijah about what he was doing there, the situation suddenly changed. Charles, still watching from afar with a distorted sense of satisfaction, began to feel a crushing pressure in his chest. His face turned pale, his hands went automatically to his chest, and he fell to his knees on the sidewalk. The pain was unbearable, and in an instant he realized he was having a heart attack. The police officers and Elijah turned around immediately upon hearing the sound of the fall. The officers rushed to Charles, but Elijah, seeing the seriousness of the situation, took command. He quickly identified the classic signs of an acute myocardial infarction. His training and experience as a cardiologist took control of the situation. Elijah asked the officers to call an ambulance and knelt down next to Charles to begin first aid. Charles, even with his blurred vision and intense pain, recognized the figure that was now at his side, trying to stabilize him. There was something about Elijah's face that conveyed calm, compassion, and a genuine urgency to save a life. His life, Charles. Unable to speak, he just looked at the doctor with a mixture of surprise and regret. He had never imagined that a black man could be in a position of authority and knowledge, especially someone who moments before he himself had tried to humiliate and remove from the neighborhood. Charles's history was marked by a long tradition of distrust and prejudice. He had grown up in a time when certain racial divisions were merely accepted in society, and over the years he reinforced these prejudices without question. Charles never stopped to consider that his beliefs might be wrong or harmful. Instead, he accepted them as unquestionable truth, making his life a reflection of these convictions. Elijah, throughout his career, had faced several episodes of discrimination. Although his colleagues and patients respected him immensely, he knew that for many his success still caused discomfort. But he believed in his mission to save lives, no matter who needed it. Elijah remembered his father's advice. Never match the hatred directed at you. Always give your best, even to those who don't deserve it. That was one of the lessons he kept with him every day, and it was that thought that guided him as he knelt next to Charles. The ambulance arrived within minutes, and Elijah quickly briefed the paramedics on Charles' condition and what would be needed to stabilize him. Charles's heart was in critical condition, and immediate transport was essential. He was taken to the hospital, where Elijah, to everyone's surprise, decided to accompany the medical team, ensuring that all procedures were carried out correctly. Over the next few hours, Charles underwent delicate surgery and was stabilized, although he still needed a long recovery time. That was the first step towards an internal turnaround, a change that would slowly begin to take shape. When he woke up in the hospital, Charles found a note next to his bed. It was Elijah's. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Walker. Life is short and deserves to be lived well. Dr. Elijah Thompson." The note was brief, but to the point. Charles, still weak, read and reread those words, feeling deeply touched and, for the first time, shaken in his beliefs. Charles spent the next few days in the hospital, immersed in a mixture of surprise, shame, and regret. He couldn't get out of his mind the fact that the doctor who saved him was the same man he had tried to harm. This reality gnawed at him from the inside, generating feelings he had never experienced before: questions, insecurity, and an uncomfortable weight on his conscience. For the first time in his life, he was forced to confront his own beliefs and the impact of his actions. Little by little, he began to notice the hospital visitors, but one in particular caught his attention. One morning, after the shift change, Elijah discreetly entered the room to check Charles's vital signs. The doctor carried out his work calmly, giving no indication that he remembered Charles's hostility or the events of that afternoon. For Elijah, this was just another recovering patient. However, for Charles, that moment was like a second chance to fix something, although he still didn't know exactly how. When Elijah was about to leave, Charles tried to call him in a weak, still hesitant voice. "Dr. Thompson." "Thank you," he murmured, feeling the weight of shame in every word. Elijah turned around, surprised but with a calm expression. He just nodded and replied kindly, "No need to thank me, Mr. Walker. Just take care of yourself and focus on your recovery." Elijah left the room, but that brief encounter awakened something deep in Charles. Elijah's calm, even respectful reaction was like a mirror reflecting the smallness of his own prejudices. Charles began to realize that, throughout his life, he had built a wall of contempt and distance toward people who didn't fit into his worldview. Now he was confronted by a truth he had previously refused to see. He had judged someone for no reason, and that someone not only saved his life, but did so without any resentment. In the days that followed, Charles felt a growing need to try to redeem himself, although he didn't know exactly how. He began to observe the hospital environment and the professionals who worked there, noticing that many of the nurses, doctors, and assistants came from varied backgrounds. Each of them worked hard, driven by a purpose greater than any social stigma. This opened Charles's mind in a way he had never imagined. Finally, after deep reflection, he decided to try a more direct approach. At the last appointment before being discharged, Charles asked for a few minutes alone with Elijah, who looked at him with slight curiosity. Charles took a deep breath, still unsure, but began, "Dr. Thompson, I want to apologize. I don't know how to explain it, but I realize now that I was unfair and blind. I judged you, and it's shameful, and also incomprehensible, maybe even for me." Elijah listened to him silently, with an understanding but firm look. After a brief pause, he replied, "Mr. Walker, I can't say I understand how you feel, but I want you to know that my job is to help anyone in need. That's what my father taught me, and that's what I do. What's gone is gone, and now you have a second chance, just as I had to prove to you that our differences don't matter when it comes to saving a life." Those words had a tremendous impact on Charles. He realized that Elijah didn't need an apology to move on, and that real change had to come from within himself. Upon leaving the hospital, Charles promised himself that he would begin a new journey of learning and empathy. He became involved in causes that promoted equality and fought for differences to be seen as strength, not weakness. Inspired by Elijah's example, Charles finally found a new purpose in his life, one that overcame prejudice and fear. Back home after his recovery, Charles felt the weight of the changes he needed to make, and every day this feeling of responsibility intensified. For many years, he had maintained distant relationships, including with neighbors and acquaintances, avoiding any closer interaction with those who did not share his beliefs. Now, Elijah's presence in the neighborhood symbolized a new beginning, but it also reminded him of past mistakes. Determined to take a first concrete step, Charles began looking for ways to get closer to his community. He discovered that Elijah participated in community projects at a free clinic, which offered care to residents of underserved areas of Boston. Charles decided to pay a visit to the site, feeling driven by a mix of curiosity and a desire to do something meaningful. At the clinic, Charles observed Elijah in action, treating patients with care and respect. He realized that the doctor dedicated his time there without any type of financial compensation, motivated by the desire to help. Feeling motivated, Charles approached one of the clinic's administrators and offered to help with resources, donating a considerable amount. But to his surprise, the administrator, Mr. Hernandez, kindly refused the money. "Financial help is important, Mr. Walker, but here we value human involvement. Maybe you can volunteer your time, who knows?" suggested Mr. Hernandez with a welcoming smile. Charles felt the impact of those words. He had never considered that helping didn't just mean giving money. The idea of spending time at the clinic was challenging, but he decided to accept the proposal, committing to attend once a week. He started by helping with simple tasks, such as organizing medications and talking to some patients while they waited for care. At the clinic, Charles encountered several people who, in the recent past, he would have avoided. Little by little, he learned about the stories of those patients. People from various backgrounds and economic situations, all united by the need for care and respect. Each interaction challenged the stereotypes Charles carried in his mind and made him open more to realities he had previously ignored. On one of these visits, Charles had a brief encounter with Elijah, who noticed his presence and was visibly surprised. Elijah approached, and Charles, now with a new look, explained to him, "I needed to better understand what it means to truly help someone, and it seems like I started to learn that here." Elijah smiled, silently accepting Charles's progress. They both knew that profound changes don't happen overnight, but that simple gesture of presence and dedication was a clear sign that Charles was on the right path. As time went by, Charles also began to participate in other initiatives, promoting neighborhood meetings to discuss topics such as inclusion, social justice, and respect for differences. Although some people resisted these encounters, he persisted, determined to rebuild community ties in a fair and supportive way. At each meeting, he shared his own failures, hoping his story could inspire other changes. Elijah was also invited to participate in one of the meetings, and his emotional testimony about the value of empathy deeply touched those present. A few months later, the community began to notice changes in Charles. He was now regularly seen at the clinic, helping with activities and interacting with those he previously ignored. However, his move was not without resistance. Some more conservative neighbors still turned up their noses at his new attitudes, commenting that he was changing too much and blending in a way that was not appropriate for someone of his position. Although these comments bothered him, Charles remained steadfast, focused on his new purpose. One day, during a meeting at the clinic, alarming news shook the place. The clinic was facing serious financial problems and was in danger of closing. Many of the volunteer doctors were overworked, and the increased demand for care meant that resources were quickly depleted. With no viable alternatives, the clinic's management announced that if they could not raise sufficient funds, they would be forced to close within a few months. For Charles, that news was a blow. The clinic was not only a place where he gave back to the community, but also the space where he learned the true value of empathy and solidarity. He knew that without the clinic, many local residents would lose access to the care they so desperately needed. Determined to avoid closure, he reached out to Elijah and Mr. Hernandez to discuss ways to help. "Mr. Walker, we have already tried to raise funds, but without success. It seems that many do not see the value in keeping this place open," explained Mr. Hernandez with a tone of discouragement. "We need a more incisive approach," suggested Charles, now with a glow of determination. "I want to lead a campaign to save this clinic. If I myself am at the forefront, showing how this place has transformed my life, maybe we can get the support we need." Elijah and Mr. Hernandez agreed, and the three began planning a major fundraiser, with Charles as the public face of the campaign. He decided to tell his story, speaking openly about the prejudice he felt and how Dr. Elijah Thompson helped him see the world from a new perspective. He exposed himself with vulnerability, recognizing his mistakes in an event broadcast to the entire community. On the night of the event, Charles took the stage, visibly nervous. He scanned the crowd, where there were familiar and unfamiliar faces, people from diverse backgrounds who looked at him with curiosity and expectation. With a deep breath, he began, "Good evening, everyone. I know that many know me as someone traditional, reserved, and maybe even a little strict." He stopped, choosing his words carefully. "For a long time, I lived with ideas that I now realize were wrong. When I found myself between life and death, someone reached out to me, someone I had treated with injustice and distrust. This man saved my life, even knowing what I thought of him. And since then, he taught me the value of something I always ignored: compassion." Charles's words had an impact on the audience, especially among those who had known him for years. He went on to talk about the importance of the clinic, not just as a place of treatment but as a symbol of unity, where differences were put aside in the name of the common good. As he spoke, the audience began to get emotional, and some people soon contributed to the fundraiser. That night, the campaign exceeded all expectations, ensuring the clinic's continuity. For Charles, this was a moment of true triumph. Not only had he helped save the clinic, but he had also finally freed himself from the chains of prejudice he carried. The news that Charles had led the campaign to save the clinic spread quickly through the neighborhood and on local social media, generating mixed reactions. Many people were surprised and even shocked by his change in attitude, while others saw his action as a powerful example of how someone could overcome deeply ingrained prejudices. For Charles, the support he received was reassuring, but he also knew there would be challenges to face. Some of his old friends from more traditional social circles openly questioned him, insinuating that he had lost his way or was just trying to redeem himself in a superficial way. Others who shared his old beliefs began to avoid him. Despite this, Charles remained steadfast, knowing he was doing what was right. At the clinic, the impact of the donations was immediate. With the funds raised, Elijah and his team were able to improve service and hire more professionals, which alleviated the pressure on volunteers. The clinic also gained more visibility, attracting new volunteers and partners who were interested in the cause. Charles felt immense satisfaction in seeing the place growing and fulfilling its role in the community. During one afternoon at the clinic, while helping to organize a relief effort, Charles was approached by a middle-aged woman who was holding her young daughter's hand. She recognized him from the fundraising event and thanked him with emotion. "I wanted to say that your help was essential for the clinic to continue. My daughter depends on the services here, and without the clinic, I wouldn't know how to take care of her. Thank you." Charles was visibly moved by her words. Realizing that his actions were impacting lives in such a direct way gave him a sense of purpose that he had never experienced. He responded with a humble smile, thanking her for her kindness and reaffirming his commitment to the community. Charles's transformation also began to be reflected in his relationship with Elijah. They developed a relationship of mutual respect and even friendship. Although Elijah continued to maintain a certain discretion and professionalism, they both knew that in some way, they had changed each other's lives. Elijah, who had previously avoided judging him, now saw Charles as a living example that anyone could choose the path of empathy, no matter how difficult it was. Charles, in turn, began to perceive the world with different eyes. Living with people from different backgrounds and stories opened his mind to realities he had never imagined, and the prejudice that previously defined him began to fade, being replaced by a genuine desire to do good and understand others. He started to participate in more events in the community, always willing to learn and help. Over the next few months, Charles became an active advocate for inclusion and equality, inspiring others around him to also question their attitudes and prejudices. He not only attended the clinic regularly, but also began supporting other initiatives that promoted education and dialogue between different social groups. And so, The prejudice and barriers he had carried for so long were finally overcome, giving way to a new purpose in life.